The highway stretched out into the night, a long, unbroken ribbon of asphalt disappearing into darkness. The only sound breaking the stillness of the evening was the low rumble of Jake Fletcher's 18-wheeler as it thundered down the open road. The hum of the diesel engine, a comforting companion on long, lonely nights, had become something Jake could rely on after years behind the wheel. But this night was different. There was something off about the road ahead, something Jake couldn't quite put his finger on. The dashboard clock blinked 2:45 a.m. The only lights on this stretch of highway were the headlights of his truck, casting long shadows on the road ahead. Jake had been driving for hours with no sign of another vehicle, no passing cars, no highway patrol, not even a flickering rest stop sign. The night seemed to swallow the world around him, and with it, his sense of time. He reached over to turn up the radio, trying to drown out the unsettling quiet, but all he got was static. He flipped through the stations, but there was nothing, just white noise. "Damn dead zone," he muttered, switching it off and gripping the steering wheel tighter. He was a long-haul driver used to these late-night runs, but there was something particularly eerie about this stretch of road. He couldn't recall exactly when he had turned onto it, only that his GPS had rerouted him due to roadwork ahead. He didn't like it. Jake took a deep breath and glanced at the sky. No stars. The clouds hung low, heavy with a darkness that seemed unnatural, like a looming storm that never arrived. A gust of wind slammed into the side of his truck, causing him to grip the wheel even tighter. The road twisted through a dense, shadowy forest, and Jake's headlights barely penetrated the thick fog creeping in. As he rounded a curve, something caught his eye. Movement at the side of the road. A figure. He squinted, peering into the murk, and there it was again. Someone standing by the side of the highway, just at the edge of his headlights. A hitchhiker. Out here? Jake muttered to himself. No way. The figure didn't move, standing deathly still, backlit by the dim glow of his headlights. Jake slowed the truck instinctively. Something gnawed at the back of his mind. A warning. He wasn't one to pick up strangers, but there was something compelling, something unnatural about this figure. He had to know. He eased the truck to a crawl as he approached the figure. It was a man, tall and thin, dressed in a black trench coat. His face was obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, but there was something wrong about the way he stood, too rigid, too still, like a mannequin. Jake rolled down the passenger window slightly, the cold night air rushing in. "Need a ride?" Jake called out, immediately regretting the words. The man didn't respond. Instead, he slowly turned his head toward Jake, revealing a pale, gaunt face. His eyes, oh God, his eyes, were black. Not just dark, but entirely black, as if they were empty sockets staring into the void. A chill ran down Jake's spine. He wanted to speed off, to leave this man on the side of the road, but he felt paralyzed, as if those black eyes had hooked into him, holding him in place. Then, with an unnaturally fluid movement, the man stepped toward the truck. Jake's instincts screamed at him to hit the gas, to get out of there, but he found his hand frozen on the gear shift. The man opened the passenger door and climbed into the cab without a word. He moved so smoothly, it was like he was gliding. The smell of sulfur and something rotting filled the truck's cabin. Jake swallowed hard, his pulse pounding in his ears. "Where are you headed?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, his mouth dry. The man turned his head slowly toward Jake and smiled, a crooked, sinister grin that revealed teeth too sharp, too predatory. "I'm going where you're going," the man said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that sent a shiver through Jake's entire body. Jake's skin prickled. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to kick the man out, to floor the accelerator and leave him in the dust. But something about those black eyes held him there, as if he had no choice, as if this was all part of something far bigger and darker than he could understand. With trembling hands, Jake put the truck into gear and pulled back onto the highway. The fog seemed thicker now, closing in on all sides, and the road ahead twisted and turned in ways that felt unfamiliar, as though he had driven into another world. He kept his eyes on the road, refusing to look at the man sitting beside him, but he could feel the stranger's gaze on him, cold and unblinking. Minutes passed in tense silence, but Jake's sense of time had become distorted. It felt as though hours had slipped away, the road stretching endlessly before him, the world outside the truck's cab fading into an impenetrable wall of fog. He glanced at the clock. It still read 2:45 a.m. Impossible. He had been driving for what felt like forever, but the clock hadn't moved. What? What's going on? Jake's voice shook as he spoke, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Where the hell are we? The man beside him chuckled softly, a sound that made Jake's stomach twist. You're not on the road you think you are, the man said, his voice like gravel grinding together. You made a turn, Jake, a wrong turn. Jake's heart skipped a beat. How do you know my name? The man's smile widened, showing more of those unnaturally sharp teeth. I know a lot about you, Jake. I know the things you've done. I know the things you've tried to forget. Jake's mind raced. He didn't want to remember. He didn't want to think about the things he had buried deep, the debts, the betrayals, the people he'd hurt to get ahead. He was no saint, but he wasn't a monster either, was he? You've been running for a long time, Jake, the man continued, his voice low and taunting. Running from your past, running from your sins. But the road always catches up with you. Jake's knuckles were white as he clutched the wheel, his breath shallow. The truck's engine growled, but it felt as though they weren't moving at all, like the highway had become an endless loop, a purgatory from which there was no escape. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror, but all he saw was darkness. No lights, no road, just an abyss stretching out behind them. Who are you? Jake finally asked, his voice barely audible, though he feared he already knew the answer. The man leaned in closer, and the stench of sulfur grew stronger, nearly choking Jake. I've been called many names, the man whispered, his voice cold and hollow. But you can call me what you fear the most. The air inside the cab grew thick, suffocating, and Jake's skin felt clammy. He didn't want to say it, didn't want to believe it, but the word slipped out before he could stop it. The devil. The man's smile twisted into something darker, more malevolent. Now you understand. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. He had heard the stories, the legends about drivers who encountered something on the road at night, something unnatural, something evil. But he had never believed them until now. His mind raced, trying to find a way out, trying to figure out how to escape this nightmare. What do you want? Jake asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. The man's black eyes bore into him. I want what's owed, Jake. You made deals and now it's time to pay. Jake's stomach dropped. Deals. He had made a lot of them over the years. But this was different. This was a deal he didn't even realize he had made, but deep down, he knew the truth. His entire life had been leading to this moment. Every wrong turn, every shady deal, every lie, all of it had brought him here, to this dark, endless road with no escape. I didn't... Jake started, but the man cut him off. You did, the man said, his voice a low growl. You've been running from your fate, but you can't outrun it forever. The truck's engine roared, louder now, more aggressive, as if the vehicle itself was alive, possessed by some dark force. The road ahead began to twist and warp, the asphalt bubbling and cracking as the ground opened up in jagged fissures. Flames licked at the edges of the highway, casting an eerie red glow over the landscape. Jake's hands shook as he tried to keep the truck on course, but the road was becoming more unstable by the second. His breath came in short, panicked gasps, his mind racing, trying to find a way out. But there was no way out, only the road ahead, stretching into eternity. The man beside him laughed, a low, cruel sound that echoed through the cab. There's no escape, Jake. You're mine now. The truck hurtled forward, faster and faster, the speedometer needle pinned to the maximum. The flames grew higher and the road began to crack and crumble beneath them. Jake's heart raced, his mind screaming for him to do something, anything, but he couldn't move, couldn't think. Then, suddenly, the man, the devil, leaned in close, his cold breath on Jake's neck. It's time to pay your debt. And with that, the truck veered off the road, plunging into the abyss. The world around Jake erupted in flames, the heat searing his skin as the truck tumbled into the darkness. The last thing he saw before everything went black was the devil's face, grinning at him through the flames, those black, empty eyes staring into his soul. When they found Jake's truck the next morning, it was a burned-out husk on the side of the road, twisted metal and charred remains. There was no sign of Jake, no sign of any other vehicle, no explanation for what had happened. The only clue was the lingering smell of sulfur and the faint, eerie feeling that something dark had been there. And on the dashboard, scratched into the metal with jagged, unnatural precision, were two words: Devil Driver.